we very often compare ourselves as entrepreneurs with these business people that are, selling billion-dollar companies or have $100 million companies, which I'm not close to. I'm not there yet. And the reality is that I'm playing on a different field, right? I set up a different game for myself. And if you don't actually have ambitions and haven't created the goal to get there and created a plan to get to that goal, it's absurd to compare yourself.
Hey guys and gals, Trevor here, coming at you with another episode of the Carrot Cast. And usually I bring on real estate investors, people that are my mentors, my friends, and the guy I'm going to be introducing to you here in a second. There's many, many reasons why I wanted to have Brad on this episode of the Carrot Cast. I'll introduce you to Brad here in a second. But I've been working with Brad for 5-6 years probably, behind the scenes, kind of on the merchant stuff. He helps me get our money here in our businesses, basically. And I've been seeing behind the scenes all the amazing things he's been doing on the just really pushing himself as a person, as a human being. And it started off him working out, and then I saw him getting some awards or applying for some awards down there for Fit CEOs. And then all of a sudden he takes on these big challenges. And I want to bring him on to talk about human performance and how to get the most out of your body and out of just you. These bodies we've been given, how do we get the most out of them? How do we also use those to make a big impact? And he's done some amazing endurance type of events, and we'll talk about some of that stuff. But let me introduce Brad Weimert onto the Carrot Cast.
Hey man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too, dude. Do you remember when we first connected? I'm sure it was some sort of event, but when we first started working together, I can't remember specifically.
I don't know. You have the. I think ultimately it was through JV Update. Yep. It was through your group, but I don't remember. We've got these crazy overlapping circles, and an early trafficking immersion summit, or maybe something in Tampa. A bunch of the JV Update guys are down in Tampa, but it's been a while now.
It has been. So we've been working with Brad for well before Carrot, so that gives you guys a little bit of context. And just so you know what his business does, Easy Pay Direct, they're based down in Austin, Texas. And like I said, they help us get our money. And anytime anyone pays us something through a credit card, it goes through this whole chain of stuff. And Brad's company really sits there in the middle to help make sure that we're protected as a business. Because if we can't take credit cards anymore, then we're out of business. We can't serve you guys. And Brad's company does an amazing job doing that. So why don't you give 30-second overview in a better way, what does Easy Pay Direct do, and then we'll dive into the performance side of things.
Cool, yeah. So I think that you mentioned something that for some business owners, they'll hear that and not understand that. They'll say, what do you mean businesses can't accept credit cards?
Yep.
Have you had an experience where you've had money held and haven't been able to accept?
Yeah, in my previous company, we had reserves placed, like we were using First Data or something like that. We had big reserves put on that one for whatever reason. And on the flip side of it, I know I went to companies locally where they wouldn't take a card, and I ended up not being able to buy because I didn't have any cash with me.
Yeah. So the kind of foundation of a lot of what you just said was that Visa and MasterCard only let 1% of your transactions get disputed before they eliminate your ability to accept cards. It's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basics. So Easy Pay Direct focuses on e-commerce companies that are doing somewhere between 1 and 50 million. And we work on tracking 5 metrics for people: their refund rate, their decline rate, which would be like churn perhaps, their chargeback rate, their effective rate, which is overall what they're paying, and then what we look at is their risk score. So what banks they're working with and the likelihood of something like that, having money held, happening. And so look at those metrics and say, hey, does this fit? Are your competitors higher or lower than this? So we benchmark it and then work on improving those over the course of the first year of the engagement. And that's kind of the nutshell of what we do.
Sweet. I'm going to put you on the spot. And if you don't have the information, man, no big deal. I'd be kind of curious, where does Carrot sit in those lines? I know we get hardly any chargebacks or refunds, but are we on the better side of things and the worst side of things? What do you see?
I mean, the obvious answer is, yeah, you're much better than everybody.
There we go.
That's how it works, Trevor.
That's right.
To be honest, I don't know with your in particular, but it's what's fascinating is just how much the marketing model impacts all of those metrics. So, if you do a trial offer of any kind, you're going to have higher refunds and higher chargebacks necessarily. But then if you are doing that same trial offer and you're selling software versus selling a supplement, a monthly subscription for a supplement, totally different metrics, right? So we're benchmarking against different things for that.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's always interesting to me, is how these little tweaks in marketing models have these radical differences.
Yeah, that is interesting, man. So I want to drop it right now and tell people why. One of the main reasons why I want to get you on here. So it was funny. I was up in Eugene. Eugene, Oregon's an hour north of where we live here in Roseburg, and I was listening to a podcast. And I don't remember specifically what podcast it was, but it was one with Jesse Itzler on the podcast. And for people who have heard of Jesse, or maybe you haven't, he wrote a book called Living with the Seal. And a new one just came out, I think, Living with the Monks or something like that. And he started a company called Zico Coconut Water, called Marquee Jets, sold them both. He owns part of the Atlanta Hawks basketball team with his wife. Sarah Blakely from Spanx. Like, he's just a high-performing dude. And I was listening to this podcast episode where they were talking about high performance and this event that he had. I'm going to throw the question to you here in a second, but he had this event, which Brad's going to tell you about. It's called Everest Thing, and it's this amazing endurance event. And Jesse kept on bringing up this guy named Brad on here. And I knew Brad Costanzo, a mutual friend of ours. Was really close with Jesse. And I'm like, oh, it's not that Brad. Maybe it's just some other Brad that I didn't know of. I knew you were doing the event, but for some reason I wasn't making the connection because I didn't know this part about you. I didn't know that you were someone who's an endurance athlete and just really pushes yourself that hard. And then something popped. I'm like, dude, it's that Brad. It's like the Brad that I know. It's Brad Weimert. He's the guy that they're talking about, that absolutely went out there and crushed this event and inspired everyone to really go bigger, think bigger, and push themselves past the point where they think that they could. So I'm going to throw it over to you now. So let's quickly talk about that event, Everest Thing. Then I want to kind of work it backwards on what triggered in you to make you want to start to do that in your life. But what was the Everest Thing event?
Sure. That's so cool to hear that. I'm going to give you a little bit of the end of that answer, which is one of the things that triggers me to do stuff like this is to hear things like that. Like, the amount of fuel that I get from hearing somebody being impacted by that is unreal. But the Everest Thing event was, so Jesse was speaking at War Room, which is a mastermind group that digitalmarketer.com puts on. And he was speaking there, and he was talking about, somebody actually raised their hand and said, hey, what's the next crazy thing you're doing? And Jesse said, well, I rented a mountain in Vermont, and I'm bringing 150 people together to climb the mountain 17 times in a row inside of 3 days, 2.5 days. And that is the height equivalent of Mount Everest. So 29,029 feet. And in that moment, I had a visceral reaction, and I probably, yelled out some expletive in the back of the room, and people probably looked at me funny, but I knew in that moment, like, that's something I'm going to do. Like, I have to do that. So it's, just frame of reference, of the 150 people that did it, a little over half of them finished it. So that gives you context for how difficult it is to do this.
Yep.
And I did it twice in the same period of time. So that was kind of instead of climbing it 17 times in 2.5 days, I climbed it 34 times in a total of 36 hours. So I skipped, it went from Friday at 2 p.m. I went completely through the night, Friday night, went until 5 p.m. Saturday, and then they forced everybody off the mountain and closed it. And then I was up at 5:45 a.m. Sunday to knock out the next, what ended up being 10 laps.
Dude, so I've got some questions here that I've been wanting to ask you since I heard that. And once again, we know each other pretty decently well. We can text back and forth. We've been working business for years. I'm like, I'm going to ask him these questions because I want to learn from it, and I want to really up-level myself and challenge myself more. Because being honest, I'm not sure if other people listen to this podcast can relate. I'm sure a lot can. I push myself in some parts of my life, but in some parts I don't. And I know for myself, when I do that, I recognize that it's easier to slack off in all parts of life when I don't push. And so I want to stop that, and I want to start to up-level myself. And a few questions, I guess. The first obvious one, people are going to go, well, why? Like, why didn't you just do the 17? Why did you have to double and do the 34?
Well, There are a lot of ways I could answer that. I'll give you the completely honest answer to that.
Yeah.
I think some of the inherent things are that I want to do something that's different, that's bigger, that scares me. And I think it's not until I get into a space where I'm really uncomfortable or really scared that it starts to guide all of the other decisions in my life. If I get myself way out of my comfort zone and I'm not sure if I can do it, and I'm committed to it, like I've made the decision, I'm doing it, I'm committed, and I don't know if I can do it, man, I will do everything possible to put myself in the best possible situation to execute. But it's not until I get there that I'll actually change the rest of my life.
Dude, I can relate to that, because this is like 4 or 5 years ago. Same thing. I hadn't been staying in shape. Just working good. Hadn't been staying in shape though. And so I thought, man, if I sign up for an endurance event, what I figured was an endurance event for me at that time. I was never a runner. I'm a baseball player. I'd run like 90 feet at a time.
Sure.
And so I signed up for a Tough Mudder with a couple buddies. And so it was 12 and a half, 13 miles. And that's what I thought it was for me. I'm like, man, this is big. I've never ran more than like 3 or 4 miles in my life. This is going to force me to train. It's going to force me to knock out of my patterns. And what happened during that time was I kept on saying, okay, I'm going to train now, 6 months out. Then I didn't. Then I'm like 4 months out. Okay, I'm going to start training, this week. I didn't. 2 months out. I'm going to start training like I need to start training now. Long story short, it was a week out from the event. I wasn't training. A week out. I'd never ran more than 3 or 4 miles in my life. And it was the Saturday before I wake up. And this is the micro version of what you did. You actually committed to hitting the real thing and training. My micro version of it was that Saturday before. I knew that if I couldn't run 5 miles that day, that I wasn't going to be doing the Tough Mudder. So I laced up my shoes, did something I had never done that previous 4 months or my whole life, and actually put my shoes on and ran 5 miles. And then I did a bunch of push-ups and did some other stuff. I'm like, not going to be easy, but I'm going to get this done. And I crushed the Tough Mudder. I'm not saying people should do that, but I'm saying like you're using that same type of thing, except you expanded way further. If I would have said, man, I'm going to do a 50-mile race, there's no possible way I could have waited that long. No possible way.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, there are 3 things that come to mind. One, I have an unbelievable amount of respect for people that go from 0 to 1, right? So, I went from with this, call it 1 to 10 or 2 to 10 or maybe 6 to 10, right? I already had a base. Like I stay in really good shape, and I do that because I want to be able to do stuff like this. Now I wasn't conditioned to run a mountain, but that's anyway. So that initial step I think is a big deal, and so I think that it's equally challenging or more challenging for somebody to run their first mile or their first 2 miles consecutively nonstop than it is for me to ramp up to more miles. 2 is I think that it is astounding what we are actually capable of and how far we can go past the point when we think we're done. And so I think that most people can, in fact, just go and run a marathon. It's a terrible idea to just go and run a marathon or 50 miles or 100 miles. But if you needed to do it, if your life depended on doing it, 100% you can do it. Yep. Now, you won't be breaking records in terms of speed, but you can make it happen.
Yep.
But the third is that the training regimen for that kind of stuff, the more time you can give yourself and the more methodical you can be, the less likely you are to break your own motivational wheel. So, if you, for example, if you went out and said, hey, I've never run more than 4 miles and I'm not going to do 5 today, but I'm going to do 10 because I know that the Tough Mudder is next week and it's 12. That 10 will probably rattle your motivation so much because it's double what you've ever done that you're not going to want to do anything after it. You're going to get deflated. And so the idea of pushing a little bit, and then hitting your stretch and then backing up and kind of winding up to things, I think is really powerful if you can afford yourself the timeline to do it.
So what were you doing? What were you doing fitness wise, health wise before this? Because you're obviously you were on a roll. What were you doing before?
I'll tell you what I was doing before and what I did for it. So I just in general, I'm exercising 5 or 6 days a week or 7. And I do a lot of rock climbing. It's been weightlifting and rock climbing historically, and a little bit of running. And lately I've been doing like 4 days a week of running, and starting to push the mileage more with that. But what I had not done was a whole bunch of vertical miles. And so the Everest Thing is all uphill. You know, it was 44.2 miles all up.
Wow.
Straight. And so training for that was a tremendous amount of stairs. I live in a 36-story building, and I would just climb the stairs for hours and hours. And, you know, my neighbors all thought I was nuts. And I was wearing a weight vest to make it a little bit more difficult. But I only had 7 weeks to train for it. So, like, a little frame of reference, and it's a totally different type of event, but in Ironman, they cut you off at 16 hours.
Okay.
So, or maybe it's 17, but they cut you off. That's the maximum amount of time you're going to spend doing an Ironman. And I was doing this for 36 hours.
Wow.
Basically consecutively. The first day was 26 hours. The next was 10 or 8. So, and most of the time when people are training for an Ironman, they give themselves almost a year to train. And I was giving myself 7 weeks. So it was a very compressed time frame. And you have to be really careful with injury on that. Fortunately, when you're doing uphill stuff, it's pretty low impact.
Yeah.
It was all uphill. So we took a gondola down or took a car down. It was just uphill, uphill, uphill. Downhill actually is what will tear up your knees and your ankles. And but so I started with 7 weeks out. I said, all right, well, this weekend I'm going to do 2 hours Saturday and 2 hours Sunday in the stairwell. And it was important to me that I did days back to back, because I knew I was going to have to do that. And that second day is unpleasant, right? You wake up and you're sore, you hurt, and you're angry, and you have to do it anyway. The next weekend I did 3 hours back to back. Then it was 4 hours back to back. And then I had to pick up the pace because I was running out of time. So I did 6 hours and then 8 hours. And I think the last weekend I think it was 10 hours back to back. And then I took a week off and tackled it. And I was doing stuff through the week as well, but those were the big weekend pushes.
So I want people to think about that a little bit. So Brad ramped up their number one. It wasn't, he didn't do 5 hours back to back from day one. He went an hour back to back, then he worked his way up. But when you think about that last weekend that you did 10 hours back to back, so that's 10 hours Saturday, 10 hours Sunday. Like you said, people are going to think you're crazy walking up down there. At that point, like, kind of what's going through your mind, and when people do, because I know a lot of people, they limit themselves based on the perceptions of others. And I want to talk about it. What perceptions did you have to get past there at home when you were training, if any? Maybe there weren't any. And then also when you're at the event, what perceptions of people at the event where they trained their butts off and they mentally limited their thing at 17, and they were probably dying at 13, 14, 15. They probably made the 17. But what were they thinking about you when they see a guy doing 34?
It's really an interesting question, because I think that I ran into obviously many people, and I was necessarily passing everybody, right? So that was an interesting component, and there were a couple people. I'll answer the kind of mental frame in a minute, but there were a couple people that I passed, probably several, that would say something like, you know, I hate you when I would pass them, and they would say it sort of in jest and laughing, like, because I just kept passing them. Or they'd say, they'd always, the question that they started to ask, especially towards the end, was, what lap are you on? Because people started to know that I was this person doing this twice. And I'd say, 24. And they'd say, I'm only on 12. And right. And so you can imagine I've got many, many hours of solitude where all I'm doing is being in my head and thinking, and you can't escape your own thoughts, which is scary, and highlights how important it is to have good self-talk and be focused. But one of the things that I thought about as I had those encounters is I thought, why would you compare yourself to me? Like, your goal isn't to do 34, so why would you expect that you would be at 24 right now? Your goal is 17. You're right on track. And it was such a good lesson to walk away with, because we very often compare ourselves as entrepreneurs with these business people that are, selling billion-dollar companies or have $100 million companies, which I'm not close to. I'm not there yet. And the reality is that I'm playing on a different field, right? I set up a different game for myself. And if you don't actually have ambitions and haven't created the goal to get there and created a plan to get to that goal, well, it's absurd to compare yourself.
Man, it's such a good point, because I think some people, when their mindset was kind of on the wrong side of things, they probably see your accomplishment as diminishing theirs, like some people would. But what you're saying is so important, because it doesn't. Like you said, they showed up to that mountain that morning with the goal of 17. And when they accomplish that or come close, I mean, that's something to celebrate. Celebrate the crap out of that. If they would then want to up-level it next time, cool. Train hard like Brad did. Up your game. Change the game plan. You're playing on his playing field now. Now go for that. And then accomplish whatever you had there. And that's something, man, that's so important. That's so important. So what were some of those other demons that you had? Because I'm sure those mental demons, as you were going through, you had to have moments when you for a split second wanted to quit. Obviously, you got rid of that pretty quick. But
well, there's no getting rid of it quick when you're going for hours at a time like that.
Yeah.
About 21 hours in or so, I had, at this point, I started at about 2 o'clock on Friday. And so at this point, I had gone straight through the night, hadn't slept at all. And I stopped for about 15 minutes Saturday morning to shovel some food into me, because I needed real food. And they had breakfast open. So I go in and grab some breakfast. And, everybody had slept at that point. And there were actually 3 other people that went straight through the night to finish their 17. Huh. And then they went to bed. So they went to bed at 7 o'clock, and we all did the 17 about the same speed. And then I grabbed food and kept going. And after a few hours, like the sun had come up, it was starting to get hot, and I started to get in retrospect, I was really dehydrated. And I had water on me. I thought I was fueling effectively, but I started to get this shooting pain in my knee, and I mean my hips hurt, my back hurt, my neck hurt, my ankles felt unstable, because you're at this you're like a really steep grade, to the point where if you misstep, you're just going to fall on your face and slide down.
Gotcha.
That's kind of the framework, but every single step I took, I had this shooting pain in my right knee. And you can imagine you're taking thousands of steps up the mountain. So every step I felt it. And at one point, the sun was beating down on me, and I thought, and I was still in all this like long sleeve black gear from going through the night. And I thought, man, what if I tear something? Like what if I do permanent damage to my knee? And then I played this whole scenario out in my head. I thought, I'm going to be in the hospital, and then I'm going to have permanent damage. I'm going to have a limp for the rest of my life. And people are going to say, oh, how did you hurt yourself? And be like, I was climbing this stupid ass mountain. And I thought, how dumb would that be to do this? And I thought, man, maybe I should stop. Like, what's the point? And what prevented me from doing that was that I had made a decision before I started that not only was it okay for me to get hurt doing this, but it was likely that I would get hurt doing this. And I think that that's a really important point to recognize, because it outlines 2 things. One is that it was a decision. It wasn't I think I'm going to do this. It was a concrete decision. And the other was I ahead of time chose what I was going to do in one of the worst case scenarios. Yep. And I think if you don't do contingency planning like that, you get into when you find yourself in an emotional state, it's very difficult to make a rational decision. And so I prepared for the emotional state of, I'm going to be a nut job at some point doing this, right? I haven't slept for 40 hours. And I am actually delirious. Like the sun's beating down on me. I'm dehydrated. I'm passing people, and I would talk to them. And then afterwards I would think, did I just say something? and then I thought, am I talking out loud right now? I mean, I was out there. But I made the choice ahead of time that all this was okay, and I could get hurt, and I probably would, and it was fine, and I was going to keep pushing.
So you said something a little bit ago about, I don't remember the exact words, but you were saying once, I was committed to it, it was happening. It wasn't just something I was like, I'm going to try this. What do you feel? Because I know for me, I can clearly tell when I'm fully committed to something and when I'm acting like I am. Oftentimes the words I'm saying are the same, but it's the feeling and everything is just different. So for you, in business, in life, whatever it is, how can you tell when there's full conviction where it's like it's happening versus versus my Tough Mudder thing? It's like, what's the difference for you?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly. I don't know how to answer that.
And it could even be in practice. Like, do you find yourself when you're preparing for that thing, is there a difference in level of preparation for it? Is there a difference in excitement that you've got for it? Maybe there's nothing. Maybe there's not, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's kind of where we started, which was I'm not really sure how to identify when I'm super. One of the hardest things in life for me is to establish beliefs.
Okay.
It's to say, hey, I'm 100% convicted that anything.
Yep.
And a lot of things in life would be easier if I had belief in certain things. But part of what gets me there is when it's big and scary. And I realize that humans are capable of doing this thing. And so the physical element of it is a really easy illustration. And there are tons of parallels in business, but I tend to accelerate fastest physically because I feel I'm convicted that humans are capable of tons of physical feats, and I'm convicted that I can outwork most people, almost everybody. But in order to do that, I have to make sacrifices. And so when that feat gets big enough, and I get a little scared, I think, okay, well, the only way I'm going to do this is if I, don't have a drink tonight, right? Is in some cases if I cut out caffeine, which is terrible to me. I love coffee. But if I make sure that I'm getting rest, right? And I start to make these choices that lead me to that are necessary to position me in the right way.
Cool.
And it's the difference between the Everesting and it's Everesting X2 is the website. You can see a little video on it, but everestingx2.com. The difference between the training for that or the Tough Mudder, right, is like you weren't making any adjustments for the Tough Mudder. You're like, yeah, I'll run at some point, right? And you keep thinking I want to do it. But for me, literally the moment that I paid to go to that event, I thought, all right, I'm not drinking at all moving forward because that's not helping me get to where I want to go.
Yep. So that's actually a perfect answer for that question, man. And I probably didn't word it well, but the way you answer that's perfect because I think it really does boil down to sacrifice. Because if it's big enough, if it's a big enough thing, a big enough goal for your business or physical or whatever it is, you are going to have to sacrifice something. Otherwise, it wasn't a big enough stretch. And I think I know for me, that's when I find myself catching myself on my commitment is those things I know I need to sacrifice. Am I actually sacrificing them? Am I seriously committed to this or not? And that's big. So I want everyone to look at that. What big commitments, what big goals have you set for yourself, you've written down or you've thought of? And what sacrifices do you have to make to nail that? Are you making those sacrifices? I think that's a good barometer to tell whether the commitment level's there in a big way.
I like that.
So a couple questions. So mindset. So you had the mindset going in, kind of as the months have passed now, or even the weeks after that. What has grown in you? What has grown in you, and what benefits have you gained out of that experience?
I think one of the biggest things that I got out of it was. And part of the reason that I do stuff like that in general is to learn about myself. 100%. I mean, it's any new thing I do, anytime I push myself. I think that when you are out really far outside of your comfort zone, you learn, you access different emotions, and you're confronted with this reality that you're going to respond emotionally. It's just. And for me, I'm a very even keel person. I very rarely am super excited or super depressed or angry. I'm just status quo. Yep. So when I push myself really hard, I find those extremes with emotion. But one of the big things that I found was that I wasn't being the best version of myself. And I've given lip service to the notion that the best way I can serve other people is to be the best version of myself. But it wasn't until I was really on the edge, pushing myself a lot physically, to the point where I impressed myself, that I saw other people's responses and saw how it impacted them. And it was that impact, it was that inspiration for them, that movement for them, that fueled me. And I saw how much I really got out of it by being a better version of myself. And I think that was probably the biggest takeaway for me.
Yeah, I so love that, because I know for me, whenever it's so 2012 and 11, right around there, I was, you and I knew each other at that time. I think we were a client of yours, and I had the publishing company at that time. And I think from the outside in, a lot of people would have looked at that as, hey, Trevor's achieving really well and a high achiever and whatever. And for certain respects I was, but during that time I wasn't happy, I wasn't fulfilled. I felt I was really living life half-assed in almost every part of life. And the thing that changed it for me that year was kind of similar to what you mentioned there, was I said, rather, no longer am I going to be living for this number or that thing. It was just a challenge to go, I can't make the impact I want to make unless I'm the best version of myself. So I want to look back at the end of this year, and that's my only goal. I can't find my purpose in life. This is going to be my purpose in life this year, is to know that without a shadow of a doubt, I did the best at everything I could possibly do in life. Husband, father, business person, all that stuff. And then once I get there, then I can actually help other people in the greatest way. And that's one thing I'd love for you guys to take away from Brad's story, and not just that one event, because Brad's life isn't summed up in this one Everest Thing event. There's been a lot of things obviously he's done to prepare for that, and that's going to be the spark plug of even bigger things to come, which I'm so pumped to see what you're going to do next. But you can't help others until you challenge yourself in a big way, like Brad has done there. So there's a ton of other things we could talk about with that, man. Like, what's next on the physical challenge side of things? Actually, let me ask you that. Do you have a physical challenge that's next now that's scaring you?
Short answer to that is no. I haven't picked one out. I started running a lot because I don't know why. Because I have some ambition to do an endurance, some sort of ultra marathon. I've never actually competed in a marathon. The Everest Thing was 44 plus miles. I ran 28 miles a couple Saturdays ago. I've done the distance, but I've never actually done it.
Yeah.
Not competed. But I have something in my head about doing a 50 or 100-mile race.
Cool.
But I don't know yet. So in the meantime, I'm trying to just clock the miles and kind of condition my body so that when something's there, I've got a leg up. So you're a really successful entrepreneur. You've got a team of people. You guys do great work. That's one excuse I think a lot of us entrepreneurs will have, is like, I don't have time to do something like this. So what did you do? And I guess what does your life look like right now? Are you married? Do you have kids? I'm single, so I don't have any kids. I have a dog named the Professor.
The Professor, I love it, man. So what did you do work-wise? Is there any adjustment work-wise there?
No, I do it all in the morning.
Cool.
So, what's funny is I put together a video person, Morgan, put together this video about the Everest Thing X2 event, and it's a really good video. But I had a good friend of mine, Cassidy Phillips, who founded Trigger Point, which makes massage balls and foam rollers for athletics, and he really developed that whole industry. But his response, and by and large, everybody's had great responses to the video, but his response was, that's not the end of the story. Like, you need to paint the rest of the picture for people. When he found out what my intentions were with the video.
Yeah.
And the rest of the picture is, look, you see me doing the event, and you see me finishing the event and going through some hardship of doing it. But beforehand, what you didn't see was me getting up at 3:30 in the morning before a conference that I was at in Phoenix so that I could go climb Camelback 6 times in a row, right? What you didn't see was me leaving the event alone and then going home and going back to my office and just being in my office the next day.
Yeah.
And it's not, if you're not a professional athlete, this stuff just has to happen outside of business hours. So it kind of absorbed I did it early in the morning. So even on the weekends, I would get up at 4 or 5 and start the multi-hour thing so that I'd be done by noon or 2 or whatever.
Cool.
But that's always it for me.
Totally, man. And it goes back to the commitment level, right? Like if you know you're doing it and you've got to push yourself, then waking up at 3:30 all of a sudden becomes way, way easier. It's still not easy, but it becomes easier. I know for me, it's funny. Like I'm struggling to set a pattern of waking up really early right now. And yet, if I'm going fishing with a buddy or mountain bike riding, I'm up at 5 o'clock, no problem. It's like no problem at all. I'm up at 5 o'clock. The alarm goes off. I'm up, high energy. So that's kind of that next thing is I want to crack through that is like, how can I make every day that? How can I make every day where I'm up and I'm quick and I'm ready to go at 5 o'clock and I need to structure some of my work stuff in a better way so it's accountability, but also you're pumped for that first few hours. What do you do diet-wise? Like not then, I think that's an extreme situation, but on your day-to-day kind of thing, what do you do to keep energy in your body throughout the day?
I'm consistently playing with that. Sometimes I'm more deliberate than others, but my general formula is I'm relatively low carb, and I try to eat less throughout the day because I notice that when I have too much food or any form of carbs throughout the day, my energy sort of tanks, and I find myself wanting to take a nap. So it's a lot of vegetables and meat, and I, for better or worse, love caffeine.
Do you do bulletproof or anything like that?
I do. In fact, these are my entertainment for the moment.
Sweet, man. Cool.
Yeah, these are fun. And Dave Asprey is a friend, and I am perpetually amazed at how much that company has grown and how much they do. Like it just is unreal to me. But anyway, I love bulletproof.
Sweet, I love it. So one last question for you, I'll let you get going. So when we were on the phone last time, you threw another thing at me, which is another big, really cool undertaking. The mastermind you've got going in Fiji coming up. Tell people what you guys did there. Now it's the same kind of thing. This is definitely along the same thread of what you did at Everest Thing. You went, okay, this is what everyone else is doing. How can I challenge myself to go to that next level? What are you guys doing at that mastermind?
Yeah, cool. So I would hesitate to call it a mastermind, but I get the comparison.
Yeah.
So I've got a business partner in that, Steve, who's from New Zealand, and we chartered an Airbus 330, which is a big plane, and we're flying 250 entrepreneurs from LA to Fiji for a 5-day event. And there are so many cool things about that. But the general idea is that it will be a very curated group of entrepreneurs. I really strongly believe that relationships are the foundation of everything else that you accomplish in life. My ability to be competitive as an athlete started, or as an adventurer, I should say, started with a whole bunch of relationships. One of them being this guy, Carl Drew, that led me down this adventure path. And I think that when you are in and the same thing's true of business or any other venture in life, right? But the more unique the situation you're in, the quicker those relationships get established. So Fiji is an opportunity to get people to unplug from their day-to-day so that they can connect in a really unique environment. The event is unpluggedfiji.com. Yeah, it's going to be super cool. So it's built around 5 tracks. Most conferences or masterminds are all about content and learning things. And one of the tracks is growth. So if you want to learn things, that's awesome. But social is the other one. So you can hang out on the beach and drink if that's your thing. We actually rented a private island for one of the days. So we'll have a day party on the private island. Culture, rejuvenation, and culture and adventure are the 5 tracks. And so it's really a retreat first, business second choose your own adventure kind of place. You know, if you want to just go hardcore and do adventure the whole time, by all means. If you want to lay on the beach and get massages, you can do that too. But you'll be doing it with a lot of people that are in the same boat as you.
Dude, one thing I love so much about it, I mean, the concept is amazing. But also that you've gone out there and you're curating your own group of amazing entrepreneurs. I want every single person listening to this to do the same thing. If you want to uplevel your network, you want to uplevel yourself, get around people who are doing that. It's really easy to stay at the level that we are when we're around people at that same level or below. So like Brad's doing here, he's going, okay, how do I surround myself with amazing people who are going to challenge me? I can challenge them, and we can do it in an amazing environment experience. So go check it out. What's the domain for that again, man?
Unpluggedfiji.com.
Unpluggedfiji.com. Well, Brad, dude, I appreciate the time here. We could talk all kinds of other stuff, and but I think people are going to pull away some amazing things, and hopefully someone on this call finds something within you to dig deeper. I want to see someone on this call, or multiple people, hit me up and send me the moment or the thing that you're going to be doing, the challenge that's going to bring you out of that current kind of rut that you're in. So last word here, Brad. For an entrepreneur that's out there that's successful in some right, but they feel like they're in a rut, what's the very next step you think that they should do, whether it's physical or not? But what is one way to break out of that rut?
Move is my simple answer. And I really think that how you said something really profound in the beginning of this, and it's really deeply ingrained in me, which is how you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you are lacking in certain areas of your life, it's going to show up in other areas. So an easy way to break patterns is always to change your physiology, to move. But I'd say it's all about baby steps and consistency. You know, if running is an easy analogy because everybody can, everybody that has two legs can do it. Just commit to it. You know, if it's half a mile a day, make sure you do half a mile a day. Actually, I've got somebody in our office that is committed to running for the next 90 days straight every day. And last Sunday, he was not feeling well and didn't want to run, but he went out and did a mile.
Cool.
And that's awesome. Like that's the ticket right there. Don't break your pattern and just be consistent about it and do little things. Dude,
I love it. Brad, thanks for coming on the Carrot Cast, man. So pumped to see everything you're going to be doing, and just grateful to be to have you in my life. I'd like to meet. Maybe we need to hook up in person another time sometime soon. It's been years, I think, a couple of years since I've seen you in person. So I appreciate you. Keep inspiring people. Go check out Brad, and you guys can go find the video. I'm sure. Is there anywhere where the video of your Everest Thing experience is posted somewhere?
Yeah, it's if you go to everestingx2.com, it's front and center. So it's Everest like the mountain, ING, x2.com.
Cool. I love it. Brad, thanks, man. Have an amazing rest of the week. And everybody, take one lesson from this and go execute it and implement it. Commit to something. Be consistent with it. And like Brad said, create the pattern and don't break the pattern. That's how you start to really break out of those slumps. So we love you guys. Have an amazing rest of the week.